Set my fork down across the plate the way my mother taught me. Tines down, handle resting at 4 o'clock, and I waited for the room to catch up to what had just been said. My son's wife had a habit of laughing before she landed her cruelest lines. A little breathy laugh, like she was about to share a secret with a girlfriend. She did it that night at my dining table, the one my late husband had refinished himself the summer before he got sick, and she said it loud enough that my grandson stopped chewing. Bless your heart, Helena. You really aren't half the woman my mother is. I remember the candle in the middle of the table guttering once. I remember the way my son, my own boy, 41 years old, a structural engineer who could read a load-bearing diagram in his sleep, sat there with mashed potatoes on his fork and his mouth slightly open. I remember the small, bright sound of my grandson's juice glass touching his plate. And I remember thinking, very clearly, almost gently, all right then, tonight it is. I pushed my chair back a few inches. I didn't stand. I didn't raise my voice. I practiced this in the bathroom mirror in some form or another for almost a year, and the practiced version was quiet. Perfect, I said. Then your mother can start paying your rent, because I'm done. My son went the color of the table linen, not paler than that, the color underneath skin. Rent, he said. Mom, what rent? He said. Mom, what rent? The fork in his hand wasn't moving. His wife's smile didn't slip exactly, but something behind her eyes shifted, the way a curtain shifts when you realize someone's been standing behind it the whole time. Let me back up. Let me tell you how a 66-year-old retired second-grade teacher from outside Hartford, Connecticut, ended up saying something like that at her own dinner table with her own grandson watching and feeling, God forgive me, relieved. My name is Helena Vosberg. My husband Theodore passed in the spring of 2022, 4 days after our 43rd wedding anniversary. Pancreatic. It was fast, the way they tell you it sometimes is, and also somehow the longest summer of my life. He left me the house on Birch Hollow Road, a 1978 split level with a finished basement and a back porch that catches the afternoon light, and a pension that was modest but enough, and a son. Our boy is named Theodore too, but everyone called him Teddy since he was 4. He's our only one. We tried for more. It didn't happen. So Teddy was the whole world, and I will be honest with you. I probably loved that boy a little too softly. My husband used to say I raised him with the sharp edges sanded off. I think he was right. Teddy got married 4 years ago to a woman named Britta Halvorsen. She was then of the Westport Halvorsens, a fact she found a way to mention inside the first 15 minutes of meeting me. Her mother, Ingrid, is a real estate broker on the Connecticut shoreline who wears white in October and has opinions about everyone's drapes. I met Ingrid exactly twice before the wedding, and I left both lunches feeling like I'd been quietly appraised. Britta is beautiful. I'll give her that. Fair is fair. She's got that Scandinavian-looking bone structure, very thin wrists. The kind of blonde that costs money to maintain even when it grows in honest. She works in what she calls brand consulting, which as far as I can tell means she takes photographs of herself in cafes and gets sent free skincare. Teddy adores her, or adored her. I'm not always sure which tense to use anymore. They had Lucas a little over 2 years ago. My grandson. There's reason I'm telling you any of this, frankly, because if it weren't for that little boy, I'd have washed my hands of the entire situation a long time before that night. Here's how it started. It started small. They always do. About 14 months after Theodore died, Teddy called me on a Wednesday afternoon. I remember because Wednesdays I do groceries and I was just unloading the car. He had that voice he gets when he's about to ask for something. Slightly too cheerful, slightly too quick to ask how I was first. Mom, listen, things are tight this month. Britta's contract didn't renew on time and the rent on the apartment in West Hartford it's a lot. Would you mind helping us out? Just this once, just until her stuff comes through. I said, of course. Of course, I said, of course. He's my child. I asked how much. He hesitated. $2,800. That was their rent. 2-bedroom apartment in a building with a doorman and an indoor pool, which I had thought privately was a lot of apartment for a couple in their late 30s with a baby on the way. But I hadn't said anything. I never said anything. I transferred it that afternoon. $2,800 from the money market account Theodore had set up for what he called rainy days and emergencies and Helena's grand adventures. I hadn't taken a grand adventure yet. The money sat there waiting for me to be brave. The next month, Teddy called again. Britain's contract was still pending. Just 1 more month. $2,800. I sent it. The month after that, he didn't call. Britta did. That was the first thing that should have warned me. She had never once called me directly without a reason that involved a photograph or a holiday. She called this time and she was warm, honey-voiced. She said how grateful they were, how Teddy was so embarrassed to keep asking, how she was the one who'd insisted she be the one to ask this time because she wanted me to know how much it meant to her personally. Mother to mother, she said, even though she was not a mother yet and I was. She said the contract should land any day now. Could I please? I sent it. This went on, off and on for almost a year and a half. 2,800 here, 2,800 there. Sometimes I'd skip a month and feel proud of myself for waiting them out, and then Teddy would mention, casually, that they'd been late on rent and the landlord was getting unpleasant, and I'd send it again. Once it was 3,200 because something about a parking spot and the building's annual increase. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to be that mother. By the time Lucas was born, I had transferred. I went back and added it up later, sitting at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad like I was preparing for an audit. I had transferred $41,200 from my husband's rainy day fund to my son and his wife to pay the rent on their apartment. Now, here's the thing I didn't know yet. I found out the way you always find out in these stories. By accident, on a Tuesday, doing something completely unrelated. It was last March. Britta had asked me to pick Lucas up from her sister's house in Avon and bring him back to their apartment because she was running late from a shoot. Fine. I love any excuse to have the baby in my car singing along to whatever's on the radio. I let myself into the apartment with the key Teddy had given me for emergencies. Lucas needed a snack. I went into the kitchen to find a banana. There was a stack of mail on the counter. Not opened, not hidden, just there, the way mail piles up when nobody's quite getting around to it. The envelope on top was from the property management company. It said, in that windowed envelope way, notice of non-payment. My first thought, honest to God, was that the bank had screwed up the wire transfer. I'd sent the rent 5 days before. I picked up the envelope. I opened it the Yankee. I'm not proud of opening someone else's mail, and I won't pretend I am. The notice said the apartment, their apartment, the one I had been paying for, had been in arrears since the previous September. 6 months. Almost $17,000 owed. The management company was beginning eviction proceedings unless the balance was settled within 10 business days. I stood in that kitchen holding the letter and I felt my ears get hot. You know that feeling? Where your ears go before your face does, before your hands start to shake? Lucas was on the rug in the living room patting a stuffed elephant. I could hear him saying boob, boob to it. I put the letter down. I picked it back up. I read it again. Then I did something I would not normally do. I opened the next envelope. And the next one. Credit card statements. A Nordstrom card, a Bloomingdale's card, an American Express that I hadn't known existed. Balances I won't repeat because frankly it makes me sick to think about. Charges from spas in Greenwich, a weekend in Newport at a hotel I'd seen in a magazine once and thought, who stays there? A handbag, one handbag, that cost more than my refrigerator. I sat down on a kitchen stool. I think I sat there for a long time. Lucas wandered in and asked for Nana, which means banana, which is what I'd come in there for in the first place. And I peeled him a banana and cut it up into the little half-moons he likes, and my hands were shaking so badly I nicked my thumb with the knife. I didn't say anything that day. I didn't say anything that week. I went home and I sat at my kitchen table with my yellow legal pad and a cup of tea that I let go cold 3 times, and I started adding things up. Every transfer I had made, every date, every reason given. And I started, and this is the part I'm a little ashamed of and a little proud of at the same time, I started keeping a folder, not a metaphorical folder, a real one. Manila, the kind we used to use at school for student files. I labeled it in pencil, Birch Hollow. That was a private joke with myself. It was the road I lived on, the house Theodore had left me, the thing I was suddenly very aware I needed to protect. Into that folder went every bank statement showing the wire transfers, every text message Teddy or Britta had sent me asking for money, and there were so many, going back so far, all phrased so casually, and eventually, over the next several months, things I gathered more carefully. Screenshots, photographs, a receipt I found in Lucas's diaper bag once for a $600 dinner at a restaurant in Soho on a night. Britta had told me she was home with the baby and exhausted. I did not confront them. Not yet. I want to be clear about that, because I know how it sounds. I know there are people watching this who are saying, what is wrong with you? Throw them out. Change the locks. Why are you still sending money? I'll tell you why. Lucas. That's the whole answer. Lucas was a year and a half old and his mother had already twice made comments in front of me about limiting grandma time if I was going to be a stress about things. Once when I asked very gently whether they needed help with daycare costs because daycare in Connecticut is highway robbery, Britta had said, laughing breathy the way she does, "Oh, Helena, you sweet thing, we'd never ask you for more." And then she'd looked at Teddy, and Teddy had looked at his plate. That was the moment I understood that the money was a leash. They had me on a leash made of my own grandchild. If I made trouble, if I asked the hard question, I would see less of that little boy. Maybe a lot less, maybe none. So I waited. I gathered. I kept paying, smaller amounts now, and only when I'd been able to verify with my own eyes that Lucas needed something. Diapers. A winter coat. Once, his pediatrician's bill, which I paid directly to the office because by then I didn't trust a dollar to go where I was told it was going. And during those months I did 3 other things, quietly, that nobody knew about. I called a lawyer. Her name is Adelaide Reinhardt and she'd handle Theodore's estate. I told her everything. She didn't blink. She told me that as the sole owner of the house and the accounts, I had options I hadn't considered. She told me about something called a revocable living trust. She told me about grandparents' visitation rights in Connecticut. They exist, but they are hard, and the best protection is not needing to use them. She told me to document everything. I told her I already was. The second thing I did was talk to my sister, my older sister Ramona, who lives in Asheville and who's been telling me since 1981 that I am too soft and that one day it would catch up with me. I called her on a Sunday and I told her the whole thing and she listened without interrupting, which is not like her, and at the end she said, "Helena, you have always been the kind one. Kindness is not the same as being a fool. Stop confusing them." I cried for about an hour after I hung up. Then I felt better than I had felt in months. The third thing I did was harder. I started spending real time with my grandson. Not the kind of grandma time you do at holidays. The kind where you become a fixture. I offered to babysit on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I drove to West Hartford in the middle of the day. I learned the names of his stuffed animals. The elephant was Mr. Boop. The giraffe was Hank. The rabbit had no name. And Lucas was offended if you tried to give him one. I sang him the songs my mother sang me. I read him the same 3 picture books over and over until I knew them by heart. I made sure that little boy knew the shape of my voice and the smell of my kitchen and the feeling of being safe with me, because I knew that whatever came next, I needed him to remember. It came in October. Teddy called on a Sunday afternoon. The voice? The cheerful one. He said the building had made a mistake with their lease and they were going to need to move out at the end of the month. Just temporarily. Just while they found something better. Britta's mother's house was being renovated, so they couldn't stay there. Could they stay with me? Just a few weeks. Maybe 2 months at the outside. I knew, of course, that they were being evicted. I'd seen another notice in the mail 2 weeks before, accidentally on purpose. I knew they had nowhere to go because Ingrid Halverson, for all her white pantsuits and her opinions, was not going to have her daughter and the smell of a toddler's diapers in her open concept living room. I said yes. I want to tell you I had a plan when I said yes. The truth is, I had something more like an instinct. I knew that having them under my roof would be terrible. I also knew it would put me closer to Lucas, and it would put Brittany in a position where she could not, in fact, keep me from seeing him. And, God help me, I'm being honest, it would put her in a position where I could see exactly what she did when she didn't think anyone was watching. They moved in on the last weekend of October. 3 carloads. Britton brought 12 pairs of shoes. I counted. The first week she was on her best behavior. She did dishes. She complimented my curtains, which she had previously told me looked very 1990s in a fun way. She asked if she could freshen up the guest bathroom, and I said, sure, thinking she meant cleaning. She meant repainting. She painted my guest bathroom a color called Grise Whisper without asking. Teddy said it looked nice. I said nothing. The second week, the slow takeover began. She rearranged my kitchen. Helena, you'll find it so much more efficient this way. She moved Theodore's reading chair, the leather one, the one that still smelled like him if you put your face very close to the headrest, out of the living room and into the basement, because it clashed with the new flow. She bought a throw pillow set for my couch in mustard yellow and dove grey and threw out the needlepoint pillows my mother-in-law had made me in 1981. I found them in the trash bin the next morning. I washed them and hid them in the linen closet under the towels. Lucas started calling me Healy. I had been Grammy. Britta had started, very gently, very lovingly, calling me Healy in front of him. Teddy didn't notice or didn't say. I let it go. I picked my battles. The little boy still climbed into my lap. The third week she had what I can only call an audience. Her mother came over. Ingrid. White slacks in November, carrying a house plant in a ceramic pot that probably cost more than my dishwasher. They sat in my living room on my couch, which now had Britta's pillows on it, and Britta gave her mother a tour like it was an open house. And this is where we're thinking of putting a reading nook for Lucas, isn't it, darling? Helena's been so sweet to let us reorganize. Ingrid sipped my coffee and looked around at my home and said, "Oh, Helena, this is all just temporary, of course." I said yes. I said, "Of course it is." That was the moment. If you ever ask me when I decided, that was the moment. Right there. With Ingrid Halvorsen telling me in my own living room that my own house was temporary. I called Adelaide the next morning. I told her where things stood. She told me what to put together. She told me to pick the night. I picked Thanksgiving. I want to tell you something about that month leading up to it because I think it matters. I was kind to them. I was kinder than I had been in years. I made Teddy's favorite breakfast. I picked Lucas up from the little playgroup Britt and I had enrolled him in. I told Britta, when she came back from getting her hair done, that the new color suited her face. I let her think I was softening. I let her think the leash was tightening, that she was winning, that the house was hers in everything but the deed. The Saturday before Thanksgiving, Britta hosted what she called a little pre-holiday wine evening at the house. Friends of hers, 3 of them, women I'd never met, women with the same blonde and the same wrists. They drank my wine and ate cheese off the cutting board I'd bought in Vermont in 1994. I made myself scarce, mostly. I sat in the kitchen with Lucas, reading him the book about the bear who can't find his hat. I heard her, though. The walls in that house are not thick. I heard her tell those women that she was managing my mother-in-law's transition, that I was getting a little forgetful, bless her, that they were looking at options for me for after the holidays. One of the women said something about a place in Bloomfield with lovely grounds she was selling me. In my own kitchen, she was telling her friends I was going to a home. I closed the book. I held Lucas on my lap and I rocked him, and I did not cry because I had cried enough by then, and I thought Thursday. Thursday it is. Thanksgiving morning I got up at 5. I'd been brining the turkey since Tuesday. I made the stuffing my mother used to make, with the sage and the apples. I made the green bean dish Theodore had loved. I made 2 pies. I set the table with the good china, the spode my mother left me, and the linen napkins and the candles in the silver candlesticks. I put out the wine glasses, which had been my grandmother's, etched with vines. I also, that morning, while Britta was upstairs taking what she called her morning reset, went into the basement and brought up Theodore's reading chair. By myself, one stair at a time, with a back that is not what it used to be. I put it back where it belonged, in the corner of the living room by the lamp, exactly where he had read his paper every morning for 38 years. Britta saw it when she came downstairs. She paused. She opened her mouth. Then she saw my face and she closed it again, and she went to the kitchen to pour herself a mimosa. Adelaide had emailed me the documents the night before. I had printed them all. I had them in a folder, a fresh manila folder, not the birch hollow one, on the sideboard, under a stack of cloth napkins. I knew exactly where everything was. I had practiced. My sister Ramona had flown up from Asheville for the holiday. She knew. I had told her everything. She arrived at noon, hugged me at the door and whispered into my ear, "About time, Helly." Ingrid arrived at 2, white again. She had brought a bottle of wine that I happened to know cost less than the one Britta had told her was Helena's favorite. Teddy was already 3 beers in by then because something in him had been sensing all week that the air pressure in the house was changing. We sat down at 4. I want to be honest about what happened next because I've had a long time now to think about it. I waited. Through the prayer, Teddy mumbled because his father used to say grace, and nobody had picked it up properly. Through the passing of the dishes. Through Ingrid's comment that my stuffing was very traditional, isn't that nice? Through Britta describing, at unnecessary length, the new Pilates studio she had joined. I waited until Lucas had eaten enough mashed potatoes that he would be content to sit and color in the little book I put next to his plate. And then Britta, who had been topping up her own wine glass for the 3rd time, who was warm with mimosas and wine and the certainty that she had won, looked across the table at me, and she did the little laugh, and she said it, loud enough for her mother to hear, loud enough for her son to hear, loud enough for Lucas to look up. "Bless your heart, Helena, you really aren't half the woman my mother is." And I set down my fork. "Perfect," I said. "Then your mother can start paying your rent because I'm done." "Teddy, rent? Mom, what rent?" I reached behind me to the sideboard. I lifted the napkins. I took out the folder. Teddy, sweetheart, I said. Sit down. You're going to want to be sitting down. He was already sitting. He sat harder. I opened the folder. I had organized it by date. I am, after all, a retired teacher. I went chronologically. I showed him the first transfer, the $2,800 in September of the year before last. I showed him the second one. The third. I showed him the running total, which I had typed up on a single page in a font, large enough that Ingrid across the table could read it without leaning forward, which she was now doing anyway because all the color had gone out of her face. I showed him the eviction notice from West Hartford, the one I had opened in the kitchen while his son ate banana on the rug. I showed him the credit card statements, the Nordstrom card, the Amex he hadn't known existed, the bag, the hotel in Newport, the dinner in Soho on the night his wife had told him she was home with the baby exhausted. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The room was so quiet I could hear the candle on the table. Britta started to say something twice. The first time it was, Helena, you don't understand. The second time it was, Teddy, this isn't. Teddy held up one hand, just one. He didn't look at her. He looked at the papers. I had saved one thing for last. It was a photograph, not a damning one, particularly. Just a snapshot, taken with my phone, of a real estate listing card I had found in Britta's purse 3 weeks earlier when she'd asked me to fish out her lip balm. The card was for my house, Birch Hollow Road, with a handwritten note from a broker, not Ingrid, a different one, a man named Bryce, that said Helena V66, sole owner, possible motivated seller Q1. I put that one on top. Possible motivated seller Q1. I put that one on top. Possible motivated seller, I said. 2-1. Teddy made a sound. I don't know how to describe it, like the air going out of something. Lucas looked up from his coloring book and said, Daddy. Very small. I turned to Britta then. I want to tell you I did it gracefully. I think I did. I had practiced. Britta, I said. You are correct. I am not half the woman your mother is. Your mother has spent her life shaping you into someone who would sit at her mother-in-law's table, eat the food she cooked, sleep under her roof, and call a real estate broker about selling the house out from under her. I have spent my life trying not to raise that kind of person, and I'm relieved to find that I succeeded. My son made one mistake, and that mistake is sitting across from me, and we're going to fix it. Ingrid stood up. Actually stood. I will not sit here. Then don't, Ramona said pleasantly. From my left, there's the door. I had not coordinated that with my sister. God bless her. I slid the last document across the table to Teddy. It was from Adelaide. Last summer, I said. I moved this house into a revocable living trust. The trustee is your Aunt Ramona. The beneficiary after me is Eucas, to be held in trust for his education and his eventual security, with terms set by me, not by his parents. Britta's name appears nowhere in any document related to this property, this estate, or any of my accounts. It never will. I looked at my son. You are still my child. You will always be my child. But you brought a thief into my home, and you let her redecorate it, and you didn't ask the right questions. And I think tonight you have a lot to figure out. You and Lucas are welcome at this table for the rest of my life. She is not. I turned to Britta one more time. You have until Sunday to be out of my house. Your things will be in the garage. The locks change Monday morning. If I see you on this property after that, I will call the police and I will show them this folder. Britta opened her mouth. I held up my hand the way Teddy had held up his. Junked, I said. You've said enough. She left the table. She left the house. Her mother followed her, very fast for a woman in heels on a hardwood floor. Teddy sat there for a long time looking at the papers. Lucas climbed down from his chair and came around to my side and put his face against my knee. I put my hand on the back of his small, warm head, and I looked at my son across the ruins of the dinner I had cooked, and I waited. He cried. My grown son cried at my dining table on Thanksgiving with mashed potatoes still on his plate. He said, Mom, I didn't know. He said it over and over. I believed him. I do believe him, mostly. He is not a stupid man, but he is a man who did not want to know, which is its own kind of stupidity, and we are still working on that part. He moved into the basement that night. He's been there 4 months. He sees Lucas every day. He's filed for divorce. He's in something his employer's program calls financial counseling, which I think is mostly someone teaching him how to read a credit card statement. Britta is back at her mother's in Westport. Last I heard, the renovations there are no longer happening. The house on Birch Hollow Road is mine. The trust is set. The needlepoint pillows are back on the couch. Theodore's chair is in its corner. Lucas calls me Grammy again. He has, in fact, never once called me Helly since that night, although he wouldn't remember why. People ask me sometimes when I tell parts of this story whether I feel guilty, whether I was too hard, whether a softer woman would have done it differently. I'll tell you what I tell them. Patience is not the same thing as weakness. Kindness is not the same thing as being a fool. A grandmother is not a wallet, and a home is not a temporary arrangement, and any woman who calls a real estate broker about selling the house her mother-in-law lives in deserves to be told, in front of her own mother, exactly what kind of woman that makes her. I'm not half the woman Ingrid Halverson is. Thank God for that. People ask me, now that some time has passed, whether I would do it all again the same way, whether I'd wait as long as I waited, whether I'd let Brishna paint my guest bathroom and rearrange my kitchen and throw out my mother-in-law's needlepoint pillows before I said a single word. And the honest answer is yes, I would. Because every month I waited was a month I learned something I needed to know, and every dollar I lost, and there were many, brought me a kind of clarity I could not have purchased any other way. I keep thinking about cause and effect, about how I'd spent 40 years as a teacher telling small children that choices have consequences, and then I'd gone home and made one quiet choice after another that added up eventually to a young woman calling a broker about my house. I sent the first $2,800 without asking a single hard question. That was a choice. Every silence after it was a choice. I had taught Teddy with my softness that I would not push back, and Britta had read him the way Britta reads everyone, and the path from my kindness to her contempt was straight as a ruler. If I am honest, I built that path. So part of fixing it was admitting that. What I want anyone listening to take from this, anyone who has been wondering whether the small thing they're putting up with is really so small, is that being a decent woman does not mean being an easy one. There is a difference between generosity and surrender, and the difference is whether you know your own worth while you're giving. I gave money I did not have to give, and I gave it without conditions, and I told myself that was love. It wasn't, it was fear dressed up as love. Fear of losing my son, fear of losing Lucas, fear of being the kind of mother-in-law people complain about at brunch. The night I set that folder on the table, I stopped being afraid of being complained about. That was the freedom in it. Britta could call me anything she wanted from her mother's house in Westport. She could tell her Pilates friends I was difficult and cold and not half the woman Ingrid was. Let her. The truth was on paper, in a manila folder in Adelaide Reinhardt's office where it would stay. I think a lot now about what I want Lucas to remember about me when he is grown. I don't want him to remember a Grammy who was sweet and convenient and let herself be moved around her own living room like a piece of furniture. I want him to remember a woman who cooked him Thanksgiving dinner and stood up at her own table and said no in a voice he could feel through the floor. I want him to learn from watching me that you can love a person and still close a door on them. That kindness without a spine is not kindness. It's just slow erosion. And that the people who tell you patience is weakness have usually never had the patience to find out what it's really for. Patience is for getting ready. That's what it's for. I was getting ready the whole time.